Let us take these words to heart as we strive to mend our societal divisions and to heal the lasting wounds of discrimination and inequality. Tonight, you'll meet 4 local individuals being honored for their outstanding leadership and work upholding the legacy of Dr. King, followed by a keynote address by social justice leader Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II. They all serve as excellent examples of our fellow citizens responding to Dr. King's call to light and love over darkness and hate. Let them be an inspiration to all of us as we seek to uphold our American ideals and the best of humanity. Beginning our program tonight will be a musical invocation by Reverend Dr. Calvin Morris and Dodie Whitaker. Thank you to the members of the Community Celebration Committee whose hard work and dedication makes this annual event possible.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in our hearts, we do believe we shall overcome someday. We come together as God's people. We come as brothers and sisters. We come as people from very many walks of life, various identities. We come and we have been blessed by the works of many people, most of whom were blessed and taught through the life and witness of Martin Luther King Jr. We are thankful that in this time of our life in the United States, facing a pandemic, coronavirus, but seeing in very wonderful ways how the people of this country, black and white and Latin, those who are from Native American traditions, persons of every perspective. So we come today thanking Dr. King for his life and witness, recognizing, as he said so often, that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. We have seen indications of that this very year. We have seen an awareness within our country of how wonderfully tied we are to one another. And so we work together We pray together, we give thanks together, and we do those kinds of things that makes America the great nation that it is.
We are not afraid.
We are not afraid. We are not afraid today. Oh, deep in our hearts, we do believe we shall overcome someday.
Thank you, Glenna Temple, for your opening remarks, and thank you, Dr. Morris and Ms. Whitaker, for your invocation. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Celebration. I am Jasmine Holland, your mistress of ceremony for the evening. Tonight, we will take a moment to reflect, to honor, and to commemorate the legacy that Dr. King left behind, his lasting influences on America, and the realization of how far we have yet to go when it comes to justice and equality for this nation. Born on January 15th, 1929, young Martin was a determined soul who dedicated his time to advancing educationally by graduating high school and attending the great Morehouse College by the age of 15. After that, he earned a degree in theology and also a PhD from Boston University, all by the age of 26. Dr. King was a revolutionary leader. He was a man who was able to stand strong and command the attention of those around him with his mere words. His message of organized, nonviolent protest caused a shift in the American culture. Dr. King helped to lead the Montgomery bus boycott, which began on December 5th, 1955 to December 20th, 1956. Black people in Montgomery, Alabama, refused to ride city buses in protest of segregated seating and public transportation. In the end, public transportation in Montgomery was ordered to become integrated. Although discrimination and segregation was nothing new to the Black children in the South, Dr. King's words and compassion for his communities fueled the hearts of children all around him, and with support led to the Children's Crusade, which was also known as D-Day. On May 2nd, 1963, and the days to follow, youth in enormous numbers came together to nonviolently march for desegregation in the South. This spotlighted event, where young people were seen peacefully demanding their basic human rights, brought attention to the entire nation about the dark side of America and its call for justice. Dr. Martin Luther King was a minister, yes, but he was able to combine his spiritual and political views to make listeners understand that justice is a right for all people, regardless of your skin color, sexual orientation, ability, or how much money you make. Again, the same mindset of his applied to every person in America, including the poor. Dr. King worked hard alongside with others to help plan and lead the Poor People's Campaign in 1968, which addressed the underside of America, the side that was continuously marginalized and set aside, the poor and the low-income citizens of America. This campaign addressed the many injustices of this country and led to 250,000 people being in attendance at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. This work has not ended. In fact, the work of Dr. King within the Poor People's Campaign still lives today across 45 states in America. Our keynote speaker for tonight, Reverend Dr. William Barker, Barber, Jr., the second, today serves in a prominent role within the Poor People's Campaign. And last year, on June 20th, 2020, held another March on Washington, where over 2.5 million people attended virtually alone. Dr. King's legacy lives on as his life continues to teach us about how to never stop fighting for what we believe in, how to recognize the injustices of not only ourselves, but within our communities, and how to be a vocal and genuine ally to others. His life has taught us that through a collective effort within our own community, we can work together to make a change. So today, we're constantly bombarded with topics surrounding politics, this nation's unjust criminal justice systems, and the continuous fear of the unknown. It is time that we join together to demand and receive justice for all people of this nation. So to begin this evening's events, we will first take the time to honor a deserving young individual of this community with the Linda Blackman Lowry Award. The recipient of this award will receive a plaque and a $500 scholarship check supported by the Synergy Partners, which includes Seven River Alliance, Downtown Main Street Incorporated, Explore Lacrosse, Lacrosse Area Chamber, and the Lacrosse Area Development Corporation. To present this award virtually tonight is John Horman and Danya Day. All right, so next we will hear from John Horman and Danya Day from the MLK Youth Leadership Award Committee, who will present the Linda Blackman Lowry Award. John and Danya, tell us about the Linda Blackman Lowry Award.
Thanks, Jasmine. The Linda Blackman Lowry Award recognizes a first or second year high school student who embodies the spirit and principles of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The award's namesake is from Linda Blackman Lowry, who in 1965, at just 15 years old, was the youngest person to march from Selma to Montgomery with Dr. King. On Bloody Sunday, she endured physical and emotional abuse and trauma. In Lowry's memoir, Turning 15, On the Road to Freedom, she tells youth, with determination, you can be a history maker just like me. Our nominees and award winner are living proof that Linda Blackman Lowry's words are true. Their courage to take action for the rights and needs of every person, their involvement in organizations that break down systemic barriers, and their everyday example sets an inspiration to us all.
Thank you, John. First, the MLK Youth Leadership Award Committee would also like to give special recognition to Addison Milady. Addison is a freshman at Onalaska High School. She is an active member of the Onalaska Students for Dialogue and Social Change Club and is a volunteer at the Kane Street Community Garden. Addison Milady's contributions to bring awareness of social change to our school and community are important and commendable.
Thank you, John and Danya. So next we are excited to introduce Jonah Harlan, the 2020 Linda Lowry Award winner. He will present this award to this year's 2021 recipient.
Kyah Davis was born in Madison, Wisconsin. Kyah attends Logan High School as a sophomore. She is the proud daughter of Shamaya Curtis and Jermaine Davis Sr. Kyah is the oldest child of 3 siblings, helping out her single mother. Kyah has become an instrumental youth advocate in the lacrosse area. Kyah's passion for racial/social justice and youth advocacy ignited when she attended the Legacy Keeper trip in 2017. The trip emphasized on STEM, Black history, the Civil Rights Movement, and education. Kyah is the founder/president of Black Student Leaders, a student-based organization that fights for racial equality and fights against racial discrimination. The mission of Black Student Leaders is to support young Black students in the lacrosse community. Kyah has led and organized protests and fundraisers in the lacrosse area. Kyah is one of lacrosse's youngest activists that fights for students of color to feel safe as well as racial equality. After high school, Kyah wants to become a nurse and become the President of the United States of America. Kyah is passionate about her school and community. She's also passionate about affordable health care. Kyah plans to travel the world like her grandfather one day. Kyah is described by her nominator as someone who is willing to put in the work to make change happen and to help educate students and adults about social justice and anti-racism. Tupac Shakur once said, "You gotta make a change. You see, the old way wasn't working, so it's on us to do what we gotta do." These are words that Kyah has embodied through her social justice work, and that is why the Martin Luther King Jr. Youth Leadership Award Committee would like to award this plaque, the 2021 Linda Blackman Lowry Youth Leadership Award, to Kyah Davis, a trailblazer and young leader for her dedication to equality and social justice.
Thanks,
at
Jonah.
Logan
I would
High
like to say
School
thank you
and
to the
throughout
committee
the
that's
La Crosse
presenting me with this
community.
award. I would also like to say thank you for my family and friends for supporting me and standing by me. My mother, my father, my siblings, my auntie, and a few friends. I would also like to say thank you to BSL for pushing me to make change and be the person I am today. The history of my work is BSL. BSL was started when a liaison that we really liked left the school. At that point, we felt like we had no voice in the school. Our main goal out of the group was to have a place where Black kids can feel safe in our school. We started off by a meeting every 2 weeks, and honestly, we didn't even know what we were doing. Our main goal was to support Black kids in our school and have a place where we are constantly reminded that it's okay to be Black and Black is beautiful. I would also like to say some more thank yous. I'd like to thank BSL one more time. I'd like to thank Lit Wisconsin and anyone that's ever supported BSL or me. Some things I would like to see. I would love to see my community step up and support Black Lives Matter. It's really important. I would love to see my school embrace Black people. I would love to see people educate themselves on the history of Black people and how that history affects us to this day. I would love for my community to be more culturally sensitive to the things that people of color go through. I would just love everyone to act like human beings and treat one another like human beings. I would love for people to stop putting Black people down, stop putting Black children down in school, and remind them that they're beautiful. Last thing, I want to say that everyone's beautiful, Black is beautiful, and be yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, John, Danya, and Jonah, and congrats to Kyah and Addison. Next, we will hear from Keontae Turner, who serves as the Community, Family, and Outreach Director at the La Crosse Family YMCA. He will be presenting our Special Recognition Award tonight.
Good evening, all. It is my humble honor and distinct privilege to herald your virtual attendance of the 2021 MLK Jr. Community Celebration, and I extend a warm welcome to you. Tonight, I give a special recognition to someone I hold at a very high reverence, a very high regard, a minister, an historian, human rights advocate, social justice advocate, and a theologian, the Reverend Dr. Calvin Sylvester Morris. Born and raised in Philadelphia, Morris is one of the first Black children to attend Friends Select School, a prestigious Quaker college preparatory school in Center City. From there, he went on to Lincoln University, where he graduated cum laude with a bachelor's in history. Then on to Boston University, where he earned a master's in history, a SBT in theology, and lastly, a PhD in American history. Dr. Morris would go on to serve as a chair board of trustees for both Friends Select and Lincoln University. Throughout his lifetime, Dr. Morris has served with glowing leadership and roles with such notable organizations and institutions like the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Operation Breadbasket, asked of him to serve in by Reverend Jesse Jackson, the African American Studies program at Simmons College, Howard University's School of Divinity, the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, and Chicago's Community Renewal Society. Dr. Morris also served as the executive director of Atlanta's Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change, a position he was asked to serve in by Coretta Scott King, with whom he had a long-standing friendship with. All I'm saying is do your Googles. What an impressive life he's lived. What a great example of exactly what Black excellence looks like. Dr. Morris is indeed a true leader, a molder of consensus and not a searcher of consensus, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would say. I want to leave you with some very encouraging words from Dr. Morris. Given the climate of our country and the insurrection we have witnessed at our nation's capital, Dr. Morris implores to us, always in America, we strive to be more inclusive, not exclusive, to be a nation that embraces all people. And that issue we have been struggling with our entire history. But do not grow weary. Do not in despair of those doing. Because the basic life and heart of America has been one of welcome. And I believe we will continue to be a nation of welcome. And even in the face of those who oppose any change, never bow to their level of hatred. Because in that, you will be diminishing your own spirit of love, your own spirit of welcome, your own spirit of respect. Do not grow weary of being inclusive. Do not grow weary to opening your arms to people who are not like you. Be open, because in that openness are lessons untold. The Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. 2020 special recognition presented to the Reverend Dr. Calvin S. Morris, a remarkable teacher, leader, human rights activist, recognized for his lifelong commitment to social justice and service alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for his unwavering optimism and faith in humanity, and for his dedication to a better tomorrow through education and intentional, compassionate leadership. Presented January 18th, 2021 by the MLK Junior Community. Thank you for your servant leadership, and may the Lord bestow upon you many more blessings. God bless.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much. I'm delighted. I'm very, very, very much delighted.
Here's the beautiful plaque.
Yes.
Do you want to say anything else, Dad?
Well, I think we are on the move yet again, and we will continue. We have to acknowledge that we need one another. We need to be brothers and sisters, people who care about each other. We don't want to be mushed up with issues about race. We want to see in each other the blessing and the love of God for all of us. So let us work together, pray together, but particularly so, be for each other a blessing. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. What an honor. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for this award. I will say that it was, I was very surprised by it. So thank you very much.
Yes, congratulations. Next, we will have Tracy Littlejohn, the youth coordinator at Ho Chunk Nation Youth Services. They will present this year's MLK Leadership Award. Take it away, Tracy.
Good evening. It is a wonderful thing to be here tonight. I think we're all very blessed to have Dr. Morris here with us tonight. Thank you, Dr. Morris, for your words tonight. I have the amazing pleasure to present this next award. Our 2021 Leadership Award is going to Amanda Florence Goodenough. As the Director of Campus Climate at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, Amanda Florence Goodenough has demonstrated visionary and transformative leadership at UWL, as well as within the La Crosse community and beyond through her work to promote social justice around issues of race, gender, sexual orientation, and other dimensions of identity. Amanda is known for her unwavering commitment to social justice, her unparalleled compassion and humility, and her impact on individuals and communities, including K-12 personnel, school superintendents, University of Wisconsin system employees, governmental personnel, community organizers, college students, co-workers, and so many others who might be unaware they have been influenced by her actions. Above all, Amanda is well known for her ability to reach out to and work with people from divergent backgrounds and perspectives. Her work on social justice issues is grounded in her practice of radical hope, the ability to envision possibilities beyond what is currently in front of us. As one community member who co-facilitated a session with Amanda during the La Crosse Waking Up White program expressed, Amanda puts herself on the line every day for what she believes is crucially important and pushes through exhaustion and discouragement to make good things happen for students and non-students like me. Her ability to demonstrate vulnerability and humility while fiercely advocating for a more just and equitable world alongside students, colleagues, and community members is how Amanda Goodenough embodies the courage, compassion, and spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Having seen her in action, worked alongside her, and being able to call her a colleague, it is now my pleasure and honor to introduce Amanda Florence Goodenough as the 2021 recipient of the Martin Luther King Jr. Leadership Award. She has received a plaque that reads, "A fierce advocate recognized for her visionary and transformative leadership, unwavering commitment to social justice, unparalleled compassion, humility, courage, and radical hope that one day we might all create and experience a more equitable and just world." And with that, I congratulate and introduce Amanda Florence Goodenough.
Thank you, Tracy. I was blown away when you shared that I would be recognized as this year's MLK Leadership recipient. I was mostly excited just to get a phone call from you, but after moving from shock to now holding this beautiful award, I feel completely humbled to be among a powerful club of past recipients and a transformative circle of trailblazers like you, Tracy, who have served as my compass. My gratitude also extends to too many others to shout out tonight, so forgive me, but there are a few who must be named, like my incredibly awesome friend, Sarah Dokan Morgan, for nominating me with the support of two of my favorite co-conspirators, AJ Klaus and Laura Abalera, and all of those who contributed touching testimonials. There are countless UWL colleagues and friends beyond the Academy who have been my fellow travelers on this journey, from my formative friends like Donna to college confidants like Kari, and through Campus Climate connections like ATP, Rise Up, the Hate Response Team, and then the Women of Color Collective, and now Social Responsibility Speaks. You've helped me feel seen, even without an award to show for it. But it is validation to receive an award for efforts that are sometimes thankless, and at other times greeted with gatekeepers or silenced by respectability politics, efforts that at worst are met with hostility and hatred. I strive to recognize the backlash as a sign that I'm doing something right, but I much prefer the confirmation of my efforts through something like this award. So I also thank all of those involved with the MLK award selection and the celebration event planning. What an important and huge undertaking. And While surely a team effort, I'm compelled to single out Thomas Harris after watching for years how he pours his heart into this event and so many other community efforts. And then I must also pay tribute to Beth Hartong for hiring me to further the campus climate mission back in 2006 and believing in me still today. And to Lynette Pryor-Lowe, who for sure would be the president of my fan club if I had one, even though I've always admired you for fearlessly being down for the revolution. Thank you for having my back no matter the cost. I need to also declare my gratitude for the badass students, I hope I can say that, all across K-12 and higher ed, many of whom I've had the honor to grow alongside. Students who are brave enough to demand a world that hasn't ever been but needs to become. When I follow the arc that bends towards justice, I find all of you. And of course, I'm forever indebted to family, the Florence, Garcia, Goodenough, and Nikolai villages I've been so lucky to lean on. My loving partner, Joel, who has been my rock, and Jager Amari and Genesee JD, our branches, our everything. And to those who have kept me grounded, my root system, Chelsea and Helen Renee. I'm not sure who I would be without sisters to follow, but I'm certain I'd be lost, especially this past year as we sent off Dad on his spirit journey in the midst of the simultaneous COVID-19 and racial injustice pandemics. An unfair and devastating heartache that too many are having to grieve. I trust that Dad found Mom, a power couple, reunited. My parents have been my foundation, always a guiding force. And while gone from this physical world, I find them all around us still. And I know that they are proud to watch me and my sisters stand taller on their shoulders. Lastly, I feel compelled to acknowledge the racist neighbors and community members from Mukwonago. Others may not know who you are, but I do. I watched you patrol our property line with binoculars and climb trees to harass and surveil my family. I learned about the pipe bombs and the death threats. I saw the newspaper clippings of my parents' lawsuit, and I found the petitions with all of your signatures that tried to push us out. You may not be listening tonight, but others are. So I set aside a moment to say, as the Mexican proverb goes, you tried to bury us, but you didn't know we were seeds. And like Kimberly Jones warned, you are lucky that all we've wanted is equality. Because somehow in the face of hatred and white superiority, even when anger is justified and revenge is reasonable, as Black, Indigenous, people of color, we exercise the superpower of restraint, of compassion, of forgiveness and patience and love every tiring day. We may be flawed in other work that our communities need to do, but we are not inferior when it comes to resilience. We are seeds, and you should know that your racism helped bear the fruit of more justice fighters. We are many and we are strong, but not because of you. We are strong before you. From my Tuskegee Airman great uncle to my Mexican immigrant grandmother to all those who walk with me, to my descendants and all those who will come after, we are generations of strong. And that is who I accept this award on behalf of. The activists, truth speakers, wave makers, the status quo disruptors, the likability riskers, the good trouble seekers, the justice fighters. That's the part of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy that is often whitewashed when we are taught only the comfortable sound bites. Beyond a peaceful servant leader, he was a radical anti-racist organizer who taught Black self-love before it was a hashtag. Dr. King championed economic justice and pushed back against silence and neutrality. In fact, when I pieced quotes together, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said quite clearly, there must be a recognition on the part of everybody in this nation that America is still a racist country. Yet large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice and humanity, more devoted to order than to justice. They don't understand that a riot is the language of the unheard. Our nation's summers of riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay. White Americans must recognize that justice for Black people and other oppressed groups cannot be achieved without radical changes in the structure of our society, a radical redistribution of political and economic power. These are revolutionary times, and we must support these revolutions because the price that America must pay for the continued oppression of minoritized groups is the price of its own destruction. These are the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he wasn't just dreaming. The MLK legacy is one of justice. Yet here we are today, our country on fire and at war with itself, battling domestic terrorism and continuing to murder Black and brown bodies, traumatizing Black and brown spirits. We need justice. This is the path to harmony and tranquility and peace, not the other way around. So I share this award with the justice fighters. Ubuntu, I am because you are. I am because we are. To you and to us, I say, holding people and places accountable is an act of love. Challenging the status quo is a labor of love. And speaking truth to power is to risk love. Our fight is love in action, regardless of the gaslighting that tries to convince us otherwise. And when organizations and institutions don't return that love, we must turn toward each other because the system and those who uphold it has never known our worth, but we do. So this award belongs to all the justice fighters. I am because you are. And as we continue to engage in community work, let us not forget the inner work of radically loving and healing ourselves, of pausing to catch our breath and then re-engaging from a place of wholeness. Let our outrage be a wake-up call for those still sleeping or just refusing to open their eyes, but let it not rob us of the joy that we fight for. And whatever lies ahead this week or this year or in this next decade, we must maintain radical hope without compromising urgency. And we should always remember and remind everyone unwilling to come along with us that our roots run deep and our branches are strong because we are seeds. And this is for all of us, so thank you.
Whew. Thank you, Amanda. And congratulations to Reverend Dr. Morris, Amanda, Addison, and Kyah for being this year's award recipients. Our community is forever, forever grateful for you all's dedication. And the work that you all do is definitely not, it does not go unnoticed. So thank you all again. So next on tonight's program, we will have a selection from the Viterbo University Choir. The selection is called Stump the Fire. It is composed by Andrea Ramsey and directed by Dr. Brett Robinson.
Oh
Thank you, Viterbo Choir, for that selection. Now we are to the main course of tonight's event. I have the honor of presenting to you tonight's keynote speaker, Reverend Dr. William Barber. The Reverend Dr. William Joseph Barber II is the President and Senior Lecturer of Repairs of the Breach, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, Bishop with the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, visiting professor at Union Theological Seminary, pastor of Greenleaf Christian Church, Disciples of the Church in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and the author of 4 books. We are called to be a movement, revive us again. Vision and Action in Moral Organizing, the Third Reconstruction, Moral Mondays, Fusion, Politics, and the Rise of a New Justice Movement, and Forwarding Together, a Moral Message for the Nation. Reverend Dr. Barber is also the architect of the Moral Movement, which began with weekly Moral Monday protests at the North Carolina General Assembly in 2013, and recently relaunched again online in August 2020 under the banner of the Poor People's Campaign. In 2018, Reverend Dr. Barber helped relaunch the Poor People's Campaign, which was begun by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968, starting with the historic wave of protests in state capitals and in Washington, D.C., calling for a moral agenda and a moral budget to address the 5 interlocking injustices of systemic racism, systemic poverty, the war, economy, and militarism, ecological devastation, and the false moral narrative of Christian nationalism. There are currently 45 state coordinating committees across the country, mobilizing around the Poor People's Jubilee platform, and we must do more. Mobilize, organize, register, and educate people for a movement that votes. On June 20th, some 2.5 million tuned into Facebook alone for the campaign's mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington, which originally was scheduled as an in-person event, but switched to digital because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thousands of others watched and listened on various media outlets. A highly sought after speaker, Reverend Dr. Barber has given keynote addresses at hundreds of national and state conferences, including the 2016 Democratic National Convention. He has spoken to a wide variety of audiences, including national unions, fraternities and sororities, motorcycle organizations, and drug dealer redemption conferences, just to name a few. Reverend Dr. Barber served as president of the North Carolina NAACP, the largest state conference in the South from 2006 to 2017, and sits on the National NAACP Board of Directors. A former Mel King Fellow at MIT, he is visiting professor of public theology and activism at Union Theological Seminary and is a senior fellow at Auburn Seminary. Reverend Dr. Barber is regularly featured in media outlets such as MSNBC, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, and the National Magazine, among others. He is the 2015 recipient of the Puffin Award and the Franklin D. Roosevelt Four Freedoms Award, a 2018 MacArthur Foundation Genius Award recipient, and he is the 2019 recipient of the North Carolina Award, the state's highest civilian honor. Please welcome tonight our keynote speaker, Reverend Dr. William Barber.
I worked 41 years in the coal mines. I have black lung, and it's just unfathomable what these poor coal miners have to go through in order to get what they have worked for and deserve.
At one time, poverty was a temporary condition. You were on a down slope for a minute, but you could bounce back up. We can't bounce back up today. It's permanent. We're not going back to the factory and building cars and trucks like we once did.
A job working at McDonald's or the grocery store doesn't pay enough for one person to live.
We work a 40-hour work week, still not enough. Living from paycheck to paycheck. Rent is $600 a month. We got water bill, electricity. I do this for my kids, and it hurts.
I'm 46 years old. I've lived in poverty here in West Virginia every day of my life. And I'm working. I am working poor with a bachelor's degree. I'm doing the best I can with what I have.
We were in the height of mass water shutoffs. This entire neighborhood was shut off all at one time.
I saw all my neighbors get shut off right in front of me. It was kind of terrifying.
I'm 42 years old, and I'm a cashier at McDonald's. I had lost my house. You're welcome to come inside. There's a lot of people that are living in their cars. You never notice until you're in the same situation.
I don't have stuff to give my children. I'm paying all these bills, and they need school clothes and stuff. They be asking me for it, I can't give it to them.
Now I'm a Kansas farmer's wife. Kansas farmers are committing suicide. Why? They're usually in debt up to their eyeballs.
I see poverty in my own community. You know, there's a 70% unemployment rate in the reservation right now.
Here in New York City, we're home to millionaires and billionaires, and we have so many people living in the street, and that's just not right.
I've been a homeless veteran twice, lived in a shelter.
I've been living down here since I was 17.
My only chance of going to college was joining the Army. We are demanding that we stop the war on our poor.
700,000 people in this country are on the verge of losing their food stamps.
This budget calls for shrinking the social safety net programs like Medicare.
I just know that everything that's happening to us isn't right.
I'm in stage 5 of kidney disease. I fell behind on my health care, and they canceled my health insurance, and they told me I have to wait until open enrollment. There's only 5 stages of kidney disease, and I'm in the 5th stage. Murder, it's murder. You know, if you ask me, it's murder.
I lost a son to gun violence, and I lost a daughter. No parent should have, in America, should have to bury their child for lack of medical attention. I'm wailing because my children,
my God,
are no more.
My God, Kevin.
Well, I'm wailing, y'all. Wailing, because my babies ain't no more. How many more babies? How many more children?
No more. Good evening to your university for this gracious invitation, and to the whole and entire La Crosse, Wisconsin community, and to the moderator, Jazema Holland. Let me thank President Glenna Temple for this humbling invitation to speak to this university family and this community about the healing of the United States and about the leadership legacy of Dr. King in light of our current times. Today you will hear a message that is built off of 14 words that Dr. King spoke less than 24 hours before he was fallen by an assassin's bullet. But those 14 words can instruct us today. After the sermon, after the lecture speech, I'll be with you for a few minutes to take questions. But listen now, as we hear what Dr. King advised us less than 24 hours before he was taken from us. Thank you so much for allowing me to be with you. Amen. I'd like to open with two texts as a touchstone for this sermon, this reflection on what the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. might still and does still say to us today. From the first is the ending portion of Amos chapter 5 and a piece of Amos chapter 6, when Amos spoke to the nation of Israel in a time of trouble, in a time of identity crisis, in a time of leaders who were abusing the people. And it reads, in the Message Bible, it says, "Now again, my message, God of the angel armies, go out into the streets and lament loudly. Fill the malls and the shops with the cries of doom. Weep loudly, not me, not us, not now, not on our watch. Empty the offices, the stores, the factories, the workplace. Empty them out. Get everybody to join in a general lament of repentance. I want to hear it loud and clear when I make my visit." And then it says, "Woe unto you, all who want to be at ease in Zion." Woe unto you who want to be at ease in Zion. Earlier it says, listen, I can't stand your religious meetings. I'm fed up with your conferences and conventions. I want nothing to do with your religious projects, your pretentious slogans and goals. I'm sick of your fundraising schemes, your public relations and image makings. I've had all I can take of your noisy ego music. When was the last time you really sang to me? Do you know what I want? I want justice, oceans of it. I want fairness, rivers of it. That's what I want. That's what I, God, want. That's all I want. Woe unto you, then, who are at ease in Zion. And from the New Testament, the letter to the Hebrews, which was written in a different time of crisis, when the Roman Empire was pressing hard against those who wanted to walk in love and justice and truth. Narcissistic, ego-building, tower-building leader was on the throne. And in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 39, Paul says to those who are thinking about quitting because it's been so hard and so crazy and so vicious, but we are not of those who shrink back unto destruction, but we are those who believe to the saving of the soul. And from these two texts, I want to lift up this subject. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to stop at this point. That subject, that theme, actually comes from a similar sentiment that Martin Luther King lifted before us about eternal vigilance in the cause of justice, love, and truth, and work toward the beloved community. In his last sermon, he sounded like Paul, sounded like Amos. On the evening before he was shot down outside the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, exactly 1 year after he had declared that there comes a time when silence is betrayal, exactly 1 year after 160 some newspapers criticized him, and even civil rights organizations criticized, and some of his ministerial friends walked away from him. He lost his invite to the White House 1 year almost exact to the date when he had decided that he had to connect racism and militarism and poverty. Dr. King offered a conclusion in that speech that night. Some called it I've been to the mountaintop speech, but that was the closing. But inside of that speech, he said something like Amos, like Paul, that is a starting point, should be for us today in our current moment of existential challenges and struggles for community over against chaos. After declaring, Dr. King that night said that America was sick with racism and militarism and poverty, facing troubling times. He said this, now let me, as I move to my conclusion, to say that we've got to give ourselves to this struggle until the end. And then Dr. King said nothing would be more tragic than to stop at this point. We've got to see it through. We have to be concerned about our brothers and sisters. Either we go up together or we go down together. Extremists would not be fighting this hard to overturn a democratic election, fighting this hard to suppress the votes of so many people, black and white and Latino, if they did not know that their agenda is threatened when the people's voices are heard and when moral fusion coalitions come together. And we must be clear that America's step is toward the third Reconstruction. That's what made Ted Cruz mount a last-ditch effort to subvert democracy, using the tactics of the deconstructors of the first Reconstruction in 1876. He was using their language, their tactics, their strategy on the Senate floor. That's what caused him and others to incite a mob to violence at the nation's capital, because they're afraid of this fusion coalition that Dr. King talked about coming together and pushing this nation forward. The past 4 years have certainly clarified that the agenda of reactionary extremism is an agenda that hurts almost all Americans. The Trump White House and its enablers in the Congress, like McConnell, robbed the federal treasury of nearly $2 trillion with their tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. And we haven't seen this kind of transfer of wealth from the poor and working poor to the greedy since the wealth that was transferred from the backs of black slaves to the pockets of their slave master in the slave aristocracy. And I'm here to bear witness that in light of this, nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back at this point. In 15 states, if less than 19% of poor and low wealth voters who haven't participated in recent years were engaged, they could decide who's in the White House and who's in the Senate, even in the South, in every election. New data shows that a progressive future is coming in the South. The South is at a moment of great demographic change, and you ultimately can't change and secure the nation without changing the South. And now, because of African American remigration and Latino and Asian American and progressive white people in the South, there's possibility. From 2000 to 2010, the non-Hispanic white population in the South grew at a rate of 4%, while the so-called minority population grew by 34%. There is evidence that something is happening. There's a remnant. There's a crowd of folk who understand we are not of those who shrink back unto destruction, and that nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back at this point. They're hollering loud, they're fighting hard, and we understand now that we have serious work to do, and if we're going to change this nation for the good, it's coming through the rejected. It's coming through the poor and low wealth communities. It's coming through those masses of people that Dr. King talked about, forming these alliances that will call the nation to repentance and restoration and reconstruction. Yes, that's where we are. And in order to meet this movement, we got to finish Dr. King's work. It's not just doing speeches on King Day. We have to build deep state-based moral fusion movements across the country. And it must be with poor and low wealth people. It must be with religious leaders. And it must be with advocates. And we must have a movement that says we are going to address 5 sins, 5 interlocking injustices, 5 evils that are cutting at the very possibility of this country. Systemic racism in all of its forms, how racism affects black people, brown people, indigenous people, Asian people, and even the collateral damage done to white people, because ultimately systemic racism is not just a hatred of black people, it's a hatred and a demeaning of democracy itself. Then we have to address systemic poverty. 140 million people living in poverty. Only 39% of Americans can afford a $1,000 unexpected bill, emergency bill. 62 million people working for less than a living wage before COVID. 8 million people have fallen into poverty between May and November of last year. Ecological devastation, 4 million families get up every morning, can buy unleaded gas, can't buy unleaded water. Over 80 million people who don't have health care in the richest nation in the world. The richest nation in the world. Where health care is still connected to your job and not to your humanity. Where having pre-existing condition, there are those that still want to make that a disqualifier for you to have health care. We have to challenge these interlocking injustices with clear policies. And the war economy, where we still spend 54 cents of every discretionary dollar in the war economy, going mostly to military contractors, not even to soldiers and wounded veterans. And less than 16 cents of every dollar we spend to health care, infrastructure, and education. In order for us to establish justice in this nation, we can't be at ease in Zion. We have to call this nation to address these 5 interlocking injustices. And the last one is the false moral narrative of religious nationalism and so-called white evangelicalism, which suggests that if you hate gay people, if you're against abortion, if you love tax cuts, if you claim that Jesus was basically a founding member of the NRA, then that's God's position. It is not. Because God's position for every nation is the same. When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was a stranger, did you welcome me in? When I was among the least of these, did you care for me? And nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back at this point. If we want to heal the soul of America, we must bind up her broken bodies and broken communities. We cannot be at ease. We must hear the cries of the millions and millions of people that are hurting and turn that mourning into policies of hope in order to bring a new morning. We must hear the mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, and meet the mourning with public policies that will guarantee people a new morning, M-O-R-N-I-G. We lose $1 trillion a year because of child poverty. We lose $2.6 trillion a year because of the lost earnings because of gender and racial wage gaps. We've spent $6 trillion on unending war. This is no way to live as a nation. There's no way to be. We're losing $3 trillion annually because we refuse to deal with climate change. 250,000 people were dying from poverty before COVID. Most of the people dying from COVID are poor and low wealth. And this pandemic will cost us some $16 trillion. And we've got to have radical policy change. Dr. King wasn't the guy that could just close a great speech with "I have a dream" or "I've been to the mountaintop." He was saying policy change, just like Amos. Just like Amos. That's like Paul in Hebrews. We cannot turn back. We cannot give in to the empire and to the ways of Caesar. No, we need radical policy change. We must raise that question that Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Peace Prize economist, raised. What is the cost of inequality? Not what does it cost to fix it, but what is the cost to leave it the same? Because to leave this systemic racism and systemic poverty and these other interlocking injustices unaddressed, it is to be constitutionally inconsistent, morally indefensible, and economically insane. And nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back at this point. And that's why when the Poor People's Campaign, when we met with the Biden policy team, we brought union members in the room, white farmers and poor coal miners from Appalachia, and black people from Alabama, and brown people from California, and fast food workers from the Carolinas, and economists and public health specialists, and civil rights lawyers, and clergy. We met with them and we said, we want you to see the faces of the people. That's what Dr. King was saying in the Poor People's Campaign. I'm going to Washington with poor and low-wealth people so that you can see them. He believed in the agency of poor and low wealth people, and they were the ones that had the politics, the possibilities, because the rejected must lead a revival. There must be, as Amos said, a general lament. There must be, as Paul said, those who say, we are not of those who shrink back unto destruction. And we said to them today, in the kingdom tradition, if we're serious about America, if we're serious about healing the country, you can't heal the nation spiritually unless you heal the sickness in the body in the everyday lives of the people. So we said, in order to do that, if we're serious about honoring the tradition of Dr. King, we have to enact comprehensive, full, just COVID relief, guarantee health care regardless of pre-existing, raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour immediately, update the poverty measurement so we're telling the truth about people's pain in this country. We need equitable and free COVID treatment and vaccines regardless of income, age, ability, documentation status. We need those vaccines to be given first to low-wage frontline workers as well as healthcare workers and the most vulnerable. We need a national rent freeze and mortgage moratorium as well as a national moratorium on utility shutoffs without credit penalties. We need to increase the impact of food and economic security by increasing SNAP and WIC and CTC and the Earned Income Tax Credit. Yes, we need resources to keep all the rural hospitals open and community health centers open and to strengthen urban hospitals and to guarantee resources that are needed in Indian health services. We must increase support for public schools to provide continuous, equitable, and quality remote learning access for the duration of this COVID-19. We must enact a federal infrastructure jobs program that prioritizes socially and climate beneficial jobs in poor and low income communities. We must protect and expand voting rights and civil rights. We must have comprehensive just immigration reform that says, bring me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. We must demilitarize our border and get folk out of cages and put children back with their families. We must enact fair taxes and repeal the Trump tax law. We must use the power of executive orders to undo all of these extreme executive orders that Trump wrote. And we must redirect some of the bloated Pentagon budget toward these priorities to get us out of COVID and to get us in a better place as a matter of national security. And in order to push this moral agenda, we must make sure that poor and low wealth people are seen and heard. We must change the narrative and build power, because healing the nation is not left or right. It's about repenting of our addiction to lies and reconstructing the systems of our shared life so that they serve everybody, because everybody has a right to live. And somebody's been hurting our brothers and sisters far too long, and we can't be silent anymore. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. What we know is trickle-down economics doesn't work. Neoliberalism, investment in the middle class alone doesn't work. If we're really going to reconstruct American democracy, build a beloved community, it must be from the bottom up. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back at this point. We must have policies that establish justice, that promote the general welfare, that provide equal protection under the law, that provide for the common defense, policies that heal the nation and closes division and brings us domestic tranquility. We must push for them with all the truth force and all the nonviolent power available to us. We should have done it before Dr. King was assassinated, but nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back at this point. So let me close here, because most people think Dr. King's most famous speech given at the March on Washington was called I Have a Dream. Actually, that wasn't the title of the speech. The title of the speech was Normalcy Never Again. That was the title. He dealt with police brutality. He dealt with us having an economic check that keeps coming back marked insufficient funds. So I want to take those words and put them with the words of his last sermon. Normalcy never again. Because nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back at this point. Hear me now. Normalcy never again. because nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back at this point. We can't turn back at this point until the poor are lifted and the sick are healed and humanity is respected and children are protected and civil rights and human rights are never neglected. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back at this point. Normalcy never again. This is not the time to be at ease in Zion. Those who know right must do right. This is not the time to shrink back. We who believe in freedom and justice must press on to the salvation of this nation's soul and literally the world's soul. We must go forward together. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. And when we think about all the people that have died so needlessly all these years from poverty, from COVID, from the lack of health care, we ought to think about them, and in their name we ought to live and push forward, because nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back at this point. When we think about all that this country could be, what could we be if we ended child poverty, if we raised wages, if we made sure everybody had health care and voting rights? We can't go back to normalcy. Normalcy never again. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. We must be even more committed in this time. We must give ourselves, as Dr. King said, to this moment. As Amos said, we cannot be at ease in Zion. As Paul said to the Hebrews, I don't care what Caesar is on the throne or off the throne or in the Senate or in the Congress or in the governorship. We are not of those who shrink back under destruction. We have come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord, trusting in his holy word, and he has never ever failed us yet. We can't turn around. We cannot turn around. We cannot turn around. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back at this point, because we must declare normalcy never again. God bless you.
All right, yes. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Barber, for your encouraging and transformational words tonight. So at this moment, we will take about 15 minutes to ask Reverend Dr. Barber questions that have come in virtually from the community. So I will begin with, the first question is, so out of all the things you spoke about tonight, Dr. Barber, why aren't we as a nation able to have these things currently?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for having me. And those 14 words that Dr. King spoke have been gnawing at me. I've not been able to deal with anything else. And one of the reasons we do not have them yet is because first we must remember the movement didn't just quit, it was killed. It was murdered, it was assassinated. One writer said Dr. King wasn't killed because he loved, he was killed because he demanded love and justice in the wrong places, which would require people to change the things policies of disparity and racism and greed that they actually worshiped. The second thing is, Dr. King in his last years was talking about racism, militarism, and poverty. And for the last 50-some years, we have almost seen poverty eradicated from the public discussion. If you think about it, when's the last time you heard a politician running saying, I want to address poverty, even though 43% of this nation is poor and low wealth? 140 million people before COVID, 700 people dying a day from poverty before COVID, 8 million people added since May of last year. And what we've had is Republicans tend to run away, racialize poverty, and Democrats have tended to run away from poverty. And we've not dealt with an issue that's affecting nearly half of this country, poverty and low wealth. 62 million people making less than a living wage in the wealthiest nation in the world. And it's not that we don't have the resources, it's we have not had the will or movement. That's why we have founded the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And we're organizing people from Alabama to Appalachia, from California to Kentucky to the Carolinas, from Maine to Mississippi. And we're seeking to change the narrative and put a face on poverty. And the third thing is, we've not faced 5 interlocking injustices in policy as a nation: systemic racism in all of its ways, from police violence to resegregation of our public schools, to health disparities among Black people, brown people, indigenous people, Asian people, and even how racism has a collateral damage to poor white people. We've not fully dealt with systemic poverty or ecological devastation. 4 million families get up every day and can buy unleaded gas and can't buy unleaded water. Or healthcare. 87 million people were uninsured or underinsured before COVID, and now some 20 million people have lost their insurance because we still are a nation, the only industrialized nation that connects people's health insurance to their job and not to their humanity and to their body. And then we're spending 54 cents of every discretionary dollar into the war economy, most going to military contractors and not even to veterans that are wounded, while we spend less than 16 cents of every discretionary dollar to education, infrastructure, and healthcare. And then we have this distorted moral narrative that I talked about. And when those 5 interlocking injustices are woven together, they keep us from reaching and moving into the place. Too often when it comes to the legacy of Dr. King, it is so watered down. It's one of the reasons I don't do celebrations of Dr. King. I think we need recommitment services, reconsecration services, because you really don't celebrate prophets, because most of the time prophets don't live long enough to see their dreams come to reality. What prophets need is people who will pick up the torch and pick up the baton. And that's really where we are now. COVID has exposed for us the fissures of racial disparities and poverty. They say that, people, we've had some nearly 400,000 people die, but most of the people that have died have been poor and low wealth, which is the one piece of data that we're not even tracking right now. We're not even tracking it, but we know that it's happening as we talk to public health officials across this country. And then lastly, one of the reasons we haven't made it yet, it's not that we can't, we are going to make it. What we saw at the Capitol 2 weeks ago, you notice how people have said, well, it only happened once before, or they've tried to suggest it's just QAnon. No, this is a result of a long history of corporate power and political power and even pulpits engaged in the politics of race-driven and class-based division that was actually named in 1968 positive polarization by Richard Nixon and Pat Buchanan. And they deliberately said, we are going to divide the country intentionally in order to gain power. And a lot of money went into it. It's a strategy of feeding and seeding intentional racial and class division in the body politics just to get people elected who will primarily make sure that corporate power has policy shaped to impact them, and that things like voting is undermined and living wages is undermined and healthcare is undermined because it does not fit the vision of corporate power. But inevitably, whenever you see that kind of division, it turns into violence. Supremacy always produces violence. So the same forces of reactionary rage that killed Dr. King erected gallows on the National Mall and ransacked the Capitol. But we also know those same forces are the forces that have burned churches, that killed 4 little girls in a church 17 days after the March on Washington. The same mentality that dropped bombs on Tulsa in the 1900s and created race riots, the same mentality that killed so many of our leaders. We have to stop saying, oh, we've never seen this before. What we saw last week is not American in terms of what we write on paper. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal in doubt. That is not American according to that. But you cannot say it is non-American. It is very much a part of the American history, and it has been used. The same tactics Trump used has been used by many others. They poured the gasoline. The difference is he lit a match. And matches have been lit before. George Wallace lit a match. But the gasoline, the thing that causes the fire is poured out every day in our politics, in the corporate world, in groups that fund people that push this stuff out, in the way we have political debates. And we have to change that, because that is not just politics. It is the kind of politics where some people get up and say, I believe in the dream of Dr. King, but then they keep the dream bound up and they only make sure the nightmare of poverty, racism, denial of health care, and xenophobia exist. And that is not the dream of Dr. King. He was not a human relations specialist. He was a prophet calling us to a radical transformation and the beloved community. And we must re-engage. And the Poor People's Campaign is fully committed to that re-engagement.
Thank you for that. So the next question is, when you met with Biden's team, what was their response to your recommendations?
Well, we had been in touch with the Biden campaign prior to the election. On September 14th, we had a gathering of 1.7 million people online for our We Must Do More campaign, mobilizing, organizing, registering, educating people for the movement who vote. And interestingly, we invited Trump and Biden to come. Trump didn't come, Biden did. And he spoke for 10 minutes laying out his goals. And he said that ending poverty was a major theory of change for his administration. We took him at his word. And once he got elected, we said we wanted to meet with his domestic policy team, not the him and Vice President-elect Kamala. We said we would like to meet with them in the White House when they're inaugurated, and we want to bring poor and low wealth people with us, and we want to bring people that I mentioned in the speech today. We laid out for them a 14-point agenda. We wanted them to listen, and I didn't lay it out. We brought 32 people online. We brought people from every race, creed, and color in this country. We brought 2 economists. We brought in 3 public health specialists and 2 civil rights lawyers, and we laid out a comprehensive agenda that you just heard me talk about. And the primary goal of that was for them to listen. But I will tell you that they said they had never had a presentation like that where the people impacted put the demands forward. They said that they clearly understood that this was not just a normal political season, that they understood it was going to take radical transformation. You know, this pandemic could cost us $16 trillion when it's all finally dealt with. And there's no way to come out of that without a radical transformation. And we're not going to overcome the vestiges of it without radical transformation. I had an email from Susan Rice afterward, Ambassador Susan Rice, who's going to lead domestic policy. And she was very moved by the presentation and actually asked us to send the full list and the details and the data, because not only do we curse the darkness, we present a way forward rooted in deep love, connected to justice and the light of truth. And we believe you got to have a footnote. We have some of the best economists that work with us. We actually have one group called the Economic Policy Institute that actually prove empirically that a moral agenda is also a good economic agenda, that it's actually a form of economic insanity not to pay people a living wage and guarantee health care. It's constitutionally inconsistent, morally indefensible, and it's economically insane. What I was so proud is they committed to another meeting. Then they put out just recently the plan for COVID, the economic plan. Now, it didn't have everything in it, but we had called for $15 in the union, $15 immediately, and that's in there. We called for the expansion of public health money for vaccines to make sure everybody, especially in underserved and impoverished community, and that's in there. We had called for more money for schools that have to deal with this online learning. That's in there. We called for increase of paid family leave and unemployment and sick leave and more money for housing. That's in there. We call for an increase to food security, an increase in money to SNAP and child income tax credit and earned income tax credit, and that's in there. Now, there are some things that we didn't see yet, but we're still pushing. We didn't see what we call for is a changing of the way we measure poverty and a collection of the data that says how COVID is hitting people based on income. We didn't see a full expansion of Medicaid. We didn't see guaranteed income. We didn't see the national moratorium on water shutoffs and debt relief and the cancellation of student debt and medical debt and putting a full moratorium on house notes and rent in a way that doesn't affect people's credit. But we're on the front end. But we are glad to see movement, and we're glad to see administration that will listen to the people. We have to do what every movement has to do. We can't go home. Nothing would be more tragic than us to turn back now. We have to keep pushing.
Thank you. The next question is, what advice do you have for those wanting to start conversations and dialogue with families who are on the opposite side of the spectrum of racism in politics? So where does one begin when it comes to these conversations?
It's a superpower. I heard somebody today talk about the superpowers. There are two of them, love and truth. Love them enough to tell them the truth. One of the things we do in the Poor People's Campaign, we've got documents. We have something called the Souls of Poor Folk, auditing poverty since the first Poor People's Campaign. Go get that document. Look at the footnotes. We'll go through it with them. Look at our poverty, our moral jubilee justice budget and agenda. Sit down with them on that. You know, take people and sit down and have a conversation about what the Constitution really says, other than the Second Amendment, gun rights. It actually says that the way you have domestic tranquility is you must ensure established justice, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. Sit down with folk and have a real conversation about the 2,000 scriptures in the Bible, both Old and New Testaments, that have to do with how nations ought to treat the poor and the least of these and the immigrant. Love and truth. That won't be easy. It won't be easy. But we need some good old-fashioned truth-telling and some good old-fashioned love. Sit down and have people sit down and say, listen, this person that's telling you if you don't elect them, this country's going to become a communist country, socialist country, and your taxes are going to be raised. Actually go underneath what they're saying. How about look at what their real record? This same person is telling you that they vote against your living wages. They vote against your health care. They cry voter suppression and they vote to suppress the vote. But once they suppress the vote, they don't really help you. They help corporate greed. They help corporate greed. Talk to people about those bread and butter, everyday life issues that people are facing, you know, and help them to see that, as Dr. King said, we all either go up together or we go down together. You know, we have to. But then if they don't shift, you know, Jesus had a family and part of his family thought he was crazy. His mother also told him one time to stop doing something. And I love that answer that Jesus gave his own mama. Mama, I must be about my Father's business. And to his brothers and sisters that sometimes didn't go along with him, somebody asked him, who's your mama and your brother? He said, those that do the will of the Lord. You know, sometimes we forget that in the gospel, it says, Jesus said, I came to bring a sword. I came to bring a sword. I came to bring, sometimes being with me is not going to create peace because we can never be at peace with injustice. You know, we have to have some honest, strong conversation. We have to call some things what they are. And love requires that. You know, we say Dr. King was a lover, but Dr. King said to America, America, you're the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. America didn't want to hear it, but he had to tell the truth. He said, America, right now, you're a sick nation. You can get better, but right now you're sick. He told the truth. Love will do that. Love is deeply connected to justice and truth. Dr. King, his last sermon was, America, you may very well go to hell if you don't turn around when it comes to racism, militarism, and poverty. He said to America, we must choose chaos or community. He didn't mince words. You know, in the speech that we often quote, "I have a dream." As I said, that wasn't the title of it. That was the closing. Title was "No More Say Never Again." Before he got to "I have a dream," he said, "We keep getting a check back marked insufficient funds, and we refuse to believe that the great vaults of this nation are bankrupt." Please do not water down Dr. King as being just a person who just wanted folk to get along. No, he wanted the nation to get better. If all he wanted was the nation folk just to get along, he'd have never been murdered. He was murdered because he dared to call out the sins of the nation and then point a way forward. But the nation, many parts of the nation, did not want to hear about its sins and did not want to repent. And in our own families, we have to have, in other families, you know, in our movement, we're not Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative or centrist. We say we want to take an honest look at every piece of public policy by looking at it through the lens of our preamble of our Constitution and the lens of our deepest moral and political values. And then we want to ask the question of every policy. Does this policy produce life in the lives of people, or does it produce death? And if it doesn't line up with the preamble, if it doesn't line up with our deepest religious and moral values, if it's not a life-producing piece of public policy, then we stand against it in the Poor People's Campaign. Not even a matter of party, it's a matter of principle.
Thank you for that. Now, our last question for tonight is, how can we specifically pray for you, Reverend?
My God. Well, you know, I would ask all of us to pray in this way. I've been asking myself this question: why am I alive? In the midst of COVID, I've had one family that's lost 12 members of their family. I have another family in the Poor People's Campaign, Mississippi, lost one young lady, 21 members of her family in a 30-day radius. And in this moment of COVID, more than any other moment, any of us could be gone in 7 or 8 minutes. If you contract COVID and if it hits right and your breathing goes down, you could be gone. And I've been asking the question, why am I alive? Why are we alive? And if we are alive, how should we use our breath when so many have stopped breathing? And so my prayer, and I ask people to pray for themselves, for me, for others, is that we will come to the conclusion that we really don't have time to waste any breath. That it's a waste of breath to hate. It's a waste of breath to oppress. It's a waste of breath to demean. It's a waste of breath to be racist. It's a waste of breath to want to divide. And when we see it, we're living in a time when breath is such a commodity. It always is, but we have to think about it now. I pray that in the name of all those who no longer breathe, that we would decide to say we're going to use every breath we have, whether that breath is 17 more minutes, 17 more days, 17 more years. We're going to use every breath we have to breathe love, to breathe truth, to breathe mercy, to breathe grace, and to breathe the justice, to breathe equality into the atmosphere and the policies of this nation. And if we do that, then our living will not have been in vain. If we don't do it, we will have wasted the God-given breath we have. So pray that I, along with you and those of us who are like that remnant that Amos talked about, like those I talked about in the sermon that Paul talked about, who refuse to shrink back. Let us pray that with every breath we take, we use it to uplift this human reality. And hopefully one day will come when we stop breathing, that our children's children will say of us that in a moment when people were suffocating under COVID and racism and poverty and war, we were the generation that breathed new life into the human possibility.
Thank you again, Reverend Dr. Barber. And thank you to everyone that submitted questions as well. So as each of us reflects on the message we have heard tonight, instead, remember that the fight for justice in this nation is a continuous fight. As much as we would like it to be, we all know that change does not happen overnight. But it is because of leaders like Reverend Dr. King and Reverend Dr. Barber that youth like Kyah, Addison, and others in this region are able to stand up for what they believe in. We may get tired, but we must keep persevering on because our future generations need us to. So stand up, stand tall, fight for equality, and settle for nothing but what you deserve, because the time is always right to do the right thing. Before we end tonight, some of you may have seen this before, but we wanted to mention again that the film Amplifying the Voices of Black Youth and Their Parents in the La Crosse area is happening again. The creation of this film was inspired by the words of local Black youth who organized several peaceful protests after the killing of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. The youth in this film shared their perspectives of experiencing racism, bullying, and stereotyping in our community from a very young age. It is these students and their parents' voices that comprise the core of the film. We strongly encourage you all to join us virtually on the evening of February 21st, 2021, to hear about the experiences from our youth and parents of La Crosse. The Onalaska High School Choir will assist us in concluding this evening with a selection of Lift Every Voice and Sing. The lyrics will be on screen, and we encourage you all to stand and sing along from home. Thank you all again for attending this year's Dr. Martin Luther King Community Celebration, and have a safe and good evening, everyone.
In the La Crosse area, multiple protests have been organized by Black youth who shared their perspectives of experiencing racism, bullying, and stereotyping in our community from a very young age. This film is intended to amplify the voices of the La Crosse area Black youth and their parents and engage our community in necessary conversations about bias, racism, and privilege.
La Crosse was kind of like an eye-opener for me, so I just kind of seen that racism is real.
You know, because no one's born racist, you know, it's taught. And it can be untaught.
Racism is in our school and we need to get rid of it.
We challenge our community to change the environment, the policies, and practices that disproportionately impact Black youth and their families.
We have years have been martyred. We have come treading a path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. For our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts drunk with the wine of the world we forget thee. Shall beneath thy hand may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
Thanks, everybody.